And so our program tonight is talking about a specific project within our group called Detroit Bird City. We're really excited about it and happy to share it with you. So here we go. Detroit Audubon, Sarah already talked a little bit about our organization, but we are an environmental organization that's focused on the conservation of birds. And Detroit Audubon was established in 1939, which means we 80-year anniversary last year. It's pretty long in the tooth, but we still got a lot of great energy and we're excited to be here in Detroit Bird City. We support over 6,000 members in Southeast Michigan, and our office is right in Detroit on the corner of Cass and Forest. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the bird scene in Detroit because it's not really something our city is super well known for. You know, you think of Detroit, you think of the Motor City, you think of music, sports, but birds probably don't pop to the top of everyone's list. But it's a well-kept secret and more people need to know. So here are a few fun facts about Detroit's bird life. We are actually situated in the overlap of two major North American migratory bird flyways, the Mississippi Flyway and the Atlantic Flyway. And so we actually get a lot of traffic through the Detroit area. And that is supported as well by the Detroit River, which is part of that major flyway. The Detroit River is one of 4 areas called important bird areas, which is a designation that indicates an area of major conservation value for birds. And the Detroit River is actually a globally recognized conservation area or important bird area for birds. We get a lot of waterfowl that overwinter on our river, and you can see them if you go to Belle Isle in the winter. You see a lot of ducks. So it's kind of a big deal. There are 12,000 important bird areas around the world, and we have 4 of them right here in our neighborhood. And the lower Detroit River is one of the best places in the whole country to observe raptor migration. We have a hawk fest in the fall migration, and it's one of the best places to watch thousands of raptors migrating for the season. In general, we've seen over 350 different kinds of species here in Detroit, and we actually have our very own field guide. This Birds of Detroit book is a real thing. And we also have our very own urban conservation treaty for birds. The city of Detroit actually signed on a formal treaty with U.S. Fish and Wildlife in May of 2017, designating our city as committed to protecting migratory birds. We were the 29th city to sign on a couple years ago, and there are now 31 different cities who have signed formally on to the Urban Bird Treaty. Here's what it actually looks like. This is an image of the document itself. A lot of very nice points made in there about birds, and it was signed, you can see there, by the city of Detroit, Detroit Audubon, the Detroit Zoo, Amy, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and the Michigan Department of Natural Resources. And it's a formal recognition of the importance of birds, including that migratory birds are a valuable resource contributing aesthetically, culturally, scientifically, and economically to citizens. We probably don't think about that too much, but all those things are true. On the scientific front, there's a lot has nature, and both adults and children, especially in this day and age when we're restricted from going outside, that the parks are open for a reason, because it helps our health and well-being during this stressful pandemic time. But there are all these books, and maybe this is a good time for you to read some of them about scientifically how nature helps our mental and physical well-being. And nature in cities is a little bit more limited. We don't have all kinds of wildlife roaming around typically, but we do have our birds, right? We have birds all over the place. We don't maybe always notice them as much as we could, but they are there. And these photos here represent, these are all Detroit birds. The little hummingbird up here at the top was actually on my balcony here in the city. I put out a hummingbird feeder every year, and I've been fortunate the last few years to have a hummingbird come visit me regularly. And it does help my mental and physical well-being to see that visitor every day. The guy on the right is a male ringneck pheasant, who I like to call the unofficial city bird of Detroit. For some reason, Detroit has a pretty thriving population of ringneck pheasants, and a little while ago, we did an online presentation about the pheasants in Detroit. And then this bottom photo is of some very resourceful robins who made a nest right in a crosswalk sign. I was walking down the street one day and I heard this chirping overhead, and I looked up and there was a nest with these 3 little babies in it. So birds find their way even in cities all around the country. But we cannot take them for granted, because actually birds are in a lot of trouble. There was a major study that was reported last fall about the amazing decline in the number of birds. 3 billion North American birds have vanished since 1970, and that represents almost 30% of all the bird population in North America. They're just gone. They have disappeared. And one of the main authors of that study, Ken Rosenberg, said the words, "It's staggering." I mean, the scientists were shocked about the amount of decline. And this is his quote: "To me, the top 3 threats to birds overall are habitat loss, and habitat loss. We're losing the battle acre by acre." And if you think of the amount of that has happened, whether it's agriculture or the built, birds are losing the battle acre by acre. So let's flip that around and see how we can start to win that battle acre by acre. What can we do? Because we know birds are good for us, and there's a moral obligation there as well to take care of these other species. Detroit has a lot of open space. Most people know that. And it's actually 23 square miles that's been reported by Detroit Future City. That wasn't an intentional thing on the part of the city, but we do have all this open space. And one of our opportunities right now is to figure out, well, what can we do with that? Can that represent a chance to restore some of this habitat? And the answer is yes. And there's a case study right across the river in Windsor, in a 1,000-acre nature preserve called Ojibway Park. It's right across the Ambassador Bridge. It's about 8 miles from downtown Detroit. And it's a 1,000-acre preserve. It started out as only 100 acres, so they've been gradually growing it over time. It's right within the city limits of Windsor. It's 10 minutes from downtown. And you can see in the photo on the right, there are all these different kinds of ecosystems there. It's very rich in biodiversity, and it's a destination for families. Some of the reviews written for Ojibway talk about taking kids for their birthday parties there and other things. It's a great way to experience nature right in the city limits. 1,000 acres right in Windsor. So Detroit's first step in answering that is what we're calling Detroit Bird City. And this initiative was inspired by a plan that came out from the Parks and Recreation Department that Barry is part of in 2017. And the city basically took inventory of all the 300 plus parks in the system to understand how they were being used. Detroit's lost a lot of population, so not all the parks were being used as much as they might have been at one point in time. And the idea was to understand which are being used, which are active parks, which are not being used as active parks anymore, and is there a creative way that we could redeploy those less active parks. And so what the city did was looked at current parkland and identified 3 different ways to redeploy that. One would be as forest buffers. Detroit's losing its tree canopy over the course of the city. Second is intentional meadows, and the third is urban agriculture. So the intentional meadows category really caught Detroit Audubon's eye, because meadows are a form of grassland, and the grassland habitat for birds is actually one of the most steep decline, because if you think about it, long grass or a grassland type of a space, people see that and they think that should be mowed, or something should be done to it. So as a result, we have a lot less grassland habitat really across the country. So this idea of the city's plan to create these intentional meadows, and that intentional word is key here because it doesn't look like it's abandoned. It is intentionally made like that, is an opportunity for us to take a space, modify it slightly, and turn it into something that is benefit to both birds and people. So we zeroed in on these intentional meadows parks. There were, I think, around 19 of those designated in this plan, and we chose 5 of them together in partnership with the city. So this is where our partnership began with the city of Detroit. So we identified 5 of those, and that is the scope of Detroit Bird City. And you can see here where these stars are. It's a rough location of where each one of those is. This is the city of Detroit. Here is the Detroit River here. And so you can see they're kind of spread geographically across the city. So this is our starting point with these pilots. Our long-term vision would be to maybe create more habitat and create something that's kind of a bird corridor that parallels the Detroit River and gets us closer to a larger corridor that the birds could even benefit more from. But for now, we're going to start out with those 5, and that is what we're calling Detroit Bird City. So a park called Callahan was one of those identified in that original study from the city. And this is what it looked like in its state in 2017. And overgrown turf grass is basically what a lot of these parks have, where they have grass, like turf grass, but there might not be as many playground things or things like that, and it grows more because it's not really used by people as much. So this is what Callahan looked like, and we visualized what this intentional meadow concept might look like and had a little bit of fun with it, but this can give you an idea of what it would look like with a lot more of a wildflower type of a meadow and some things that make it feel more intentional. It's supposed to be this way, with things like signs and benches and birdhouses. And so someone seeing this type of a space might not consider it as abandoned, but say, oh, this is a wildflower meadow. And the beautification is also key to this as well. With the amount of flowers in the mix, it feels more like it should be there, or this is the way it's supposed to be, even if it's longer than turf grass. So this was our vision that we worked on together. And last year at Callahan, we took the first step toward bringing that to be reality. And at this point, I'm going to ask Barry Burton to take us through the process, which is evolving really into a methodology for us of what we did at Callahan. Okay, Barry?
Well, the first, we worked with our internal planning department within the Parks and Recs department of engaging and notifying neighbors that this is a park that we would like to turn into a bird meadow. And what was nice is that the response was very positive. And that is something that is extremely important to us, that when we take something that most people expect to be mowed on a regular basis and turn it into something quite different, that they are aware, engaged, and appreciative of what our efforts are. And in this case, it was kind of like pressing the easy button because community really rallied. And the first was the cleanup. And then we engaged, Diane, you have to tell me if I'm getting ahead of myself, but we engaged the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And through them, we had a connection of I guess the best way to describe is a volunteer nature person who comes to us from a well-resourced outfit in Lansing, who could come and till this grassland, and till it and till it and till it, because one of our goals was a little bit opposite of what the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service likes to do to get meadows established, which is to spray everything with glyphosate. And Diane and I both agreed that wouldn't it be nice if we developed a model that didn't even bring into bear this chemical, which is now under a lot more scrutiny. And Derek Sunderland came with not just a few pieces of equipment, but a lot of equipment. And he even removed asphalt and cement that was in the park from a former basketball court, an alley. And then our city Department of Park Development Unit saw all this debris in there, and even without, it was kind of funny, even without me asking, they went and picked it all up and took it all away, not knowing that they were trampling on some of the new meadow that was being developed. But you know, an honest mistake is a good mistake, especially if it helped us in our cause. And it developed a model that we would like to pursue in the other parks, which is glyphosate-free, till and till and till, and what I want to say, till and kill, until the soil is exposed. We had some extremely ripe conditions for seed germination, which included a drought after everything was tilled, which then further alleviated the need for weed control. And then once the seed went down, we had a series of storms that came through almost on a 5 to 10 day interval that allowed the seed to germinate much faster than any weeds could. And we ended up with quite a charismatic situation. And I think it's really, people are really taking notice of it. But Diane, I'll hand it back to you if you think that this is where you want to pick up again, or if you want me to explain more, I'm happy to.
I think that's good, Barry. I was going to get into some of the programming that Detroit Audubon has offered to help kind of enhance the whole intentional thing, but it really has been, like Barry said, we push the easy button and we don't feel like this will happen every time, but the neighborhood, the community was involved. You can see this sign here, that's Paul Weirtz. He's one of the project champions. He built that signboard, and it's we've posted pictures of birds that people might see there, and Paul mows the area to keep the weeds down. You can see here Paul and other neighbors engaging in conversation about the design. And so really getting the community involved and getting their support was a go, no-go decision for us in moving forward in each location. And the city's been, Barry has been really a great champion of the work inside the city. I'd like to remind us that we're helping the city implement their own plan, but the fact that it is being realized and it's going so well, it's just been a really enjoyable experience, and sometimes that's not always the case. And Derek, who's driving all this equipment, has come down from Lansing, and you remember all that long turf grass. This picture at the right is what it looked like when Derek got done doing his till and kill rounds. So very effective, totally chem-free, which was an important objective for us. We didn't want to go and throw a bunch of Roundup down. So a lot of things that we hope can evolve into something that replicates. And here we are less than 3 months after the seed got planted. This is what it looked like. So we had beautiful yellow and red flowers coming up. I forget how many flowers are in the mix berry, but this is a mix of native grasses and flowers. Do you want to mention some of the plants that are in there?
We asked Mary from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, give us the most charismatic group you can possibly give, because we really need to. And so the tick seeds really came out in huge numbers. And I think that was also a great asset to have, because if you're trying to sell this, it's got to look kind of romantic, kind of pretty. Might not be exactly the perfect meadow mix for birds, but we're really trying to balance between, that looks really nice. And what you do find in this mix is that it looks good up close, and it also looks very good from just a kind of pedestrian walking by or car driving by at a relatively slow pace to see, oh yeah, that's not just one of these unkept lots in the city of Detroit, which is what we're constantly fighting, because in Detroit, people believe unmowed lawn is light. And it's going to be a battle we're going to be facing for a long time. And maybe the tides will turn that enough people say, if we as a group can keep throwing out charismatic plants, we'll get more and more buy-in from groups that this is worth doing.
Right. So we're working on that perception. Remember, we mentioned earlier that we had to mow the meadow in order to keep the weeds down. Well, we had to mow it even after the flowers came up, and that was really kind of a heartbreaking thing to do. The neighbors begged us not to do that, and we held off as long as we could. But we were hoping that the meadow, this all happened last year, so we're hoping that the meadow comes back even stronger and more diverse this spring. So starting soon. So one of the other things that we can do to make it feel intentional and be an activity-based area, you saw the picture that had signs and benches in it, and we're talking about pathways as well, and those do not exist yet at Callahan, but that will be the next phase of thing that we do hopefully this summer. But in terms of actual event types of activities, we've held birdhouse building at some of our community spaces, and that's a great project for kids to get involved in. Some kids in one of the neighborhoods where we worked actually put their names on the birdhouse, and so that's my birdhouse. And so that stewardship and that ownership opportunity manifests themselves through things like birdhouses, which seem like a simple thing, but it's really helped to change the way that people look at spaces. Also, bird walks. We talked earlier about noticing birds. Well, if you've got one of those Birds of Detroit books and a pair of binoculars, and Detroit Audubon has a lot of pairs of binoculars that we loan to people who don't have them, we walk around and look for the birds of Detroit and show people how to use binoculars. And so that's another activity that's a fun thing to do. Then you can identify birds, as we know, by sight or by sound. And that's another way to help activate these areas and add to the intentionality of the Detroit Bird City meadows. So our plan for all of this is that our first park we did last year, and that was Callahan. We're planning to do the other 4 parks out of the 5 pilot parks this year, but obviously we're a little preoccupied with a global pandemic right now. If we're lucky, we might be able to do 1 park, but our planting season really ends at the end of June, and then it starts to get into not so ideal conditions. But there's 1 that we're holding out hopes for, and then the other 3 will happen in 2021. And the goals of this, as we've talked so far, is to restore grassland habitat for birds and to really provide an enhanced nature experience for people. If you remember, Callahan was a form of nature before with the overgrown turf grass, but we are enhancing that not only for the birds, because actually turf grass in any park where it exists is not a native plant, and it really doesn't do a whole lot to support bird and other insect populations. But native meadows are much more diverse, more beautiful, and they theoretically will bring more birds and enhance the bird life. And we did hear a lot of birds in Callahan last year. Also saw a lot of butterflies, a lot of monarchs, a lot of monarch caterpillars that weren't there before, because milkweed that supports caterpillar or monarchs was part of our mix. And then as part of the community activities, we would include bird watching, ultimately community science. I mean, one of the things that we are doing as part of the Detroit Bird City program is taking bird surveys. We're actually scientifically measuring and counting the number of birds in a space, so we can have a before and after profile of what kinds of birds are there and how many birds are there. And ultimately, if there's interest in the communities, that can be an activity that community members could do. There are tools to do it and ways to learn how to do it, and we hope to welcome community members to help us with the ongoing monitoring of birds. And then finally, it reduces city maintenance expense. I mean, that was one of the motivations for putting the plan together. That meadow, when it's mature, will not need nearly as much mowing as it did when it was a turf grass park. So this will save the city money as well in the long run. So we do have a lot of partners. We've touched on some of them here today, and it's kind of grown over time, but there really is a great group of partners that have come together with human resources or from financial resources to help them make this happen with us together. And it would not have been as successful without the help of all these folks. Michigan State University actually has a study in place that's coordinating with us to study the health benefits to humans. So we mentioned we'll be monitoring the bird populations and the bird health. There's a parallel effort to study how people respond and how people's health improves with the installation of these intentional meadows. So I like to tease this as kind of the next step, because once we do our 5 parks, well, what comes after that? Well, when we have talked about this project to people in different presentations and formats, people have come to us and said, hey, I have these empty lots. I would like to make my property into a meadow as well. What can I do? And so this methodology that we've been talking about today is something that we would make available not only in these 5 parks, but to other areas in the city. And Barry and his colleagues have been very thoughtful and offering ways to expand our Detroit Bird City parks and use other city spaces that might not even be designated parks as habitat. And people who are private owners are getting inspired by this as well. And so suddenly we have the opportunity to go beyond our 5 Detroit Bird City parks, which are about 5 acres when you add all those together, and take some steps toward our 1,000-acre goal to kind of step up to what Windsor's doing as well. So we are in the process of defining, we haven't really launched it yet, but we're in the process of defining this 1,000-acre project. And we want to see how close we can get to that here in Detroit. I think we can do it if we put our minds to it. So at this point, thank you all very much for your attention. And we have a little Zoom poll that we would love to get your input on. Right, Sarah? Here we go. Just 2 questions. Did you know the city of Detroit was signed on to a treaty? Yes or no? And do you think that we can get to that 1,000-acre goal? Be honest. Okay, I think we're about there, Sarah. Okay, here are the results. 28% of you knew that the city was signed on to the treaty, so that's good to know. And for the other 72%, you learned that tonight, so that's great. And 90% of the people think we can get to the 1,000 acres. That's great. That makes us happy. And if any of you have property that you want to think about doing it, by all means, let us know. But that's really encouraging to hear. We don't know how we're going to get there, but we're going to try and figure it out on the fly. So thank you. Thank you for participating. And at this point, we will take any questions. Have there been questions coming up in the chat?
Yeah, I can take care of those. I've been keeping track. While we're answering questions, if anybody has any other questions, feel free to put them in. We have a little bit of time, so anything that you can think of. So our first question for you, Diane, is does the park have to be reseeded each year? Are the flowers perennials or annuals?
Well, Barry, you're probably better equipped to answer that. I think I know the answer, but I'm going to let the expert.
The park doesn't need to be reseeded, at least Callahan. In some cases, we might want to do a second seeding. Excuse me, the plants are all designed to be perennial.
And therefore lower
So
maintenance.
if the failure rate was high due to whatever circumstances, we might want to go in another batch of seeds. I'm actually kind of reminded about right now, we're about to hit a record frost, and it's going to do damage to gardens. I hope it doesn't do damage to our Callahan, but just never know.
Mm-hmm.
I should mention that, I don't know if we did when we were talking, but the seeds that were planted in Callahan were donated by U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And
that's right.
They have a program where if a property owner commits to creating or using their property as habitat for at least 10 years, that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife will donate the seeds. So the seed
But they've actually, I'm sorry, Diane, to interrupt. They've actually changed their program because of a growing desire to have these meadows. They will actually go down to 1 year.
Oh, okay.
Because we're trying to expand this into some of the land bank properties. And Meredith, who was part of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, said in these cases they would agree to a much shorter duration so that it doesn't hold up land in case development pressure comes in and create a bad PR campaign. You know, oh, we can't develop this land even though someone wants to build something that produces 700 jobs because it's a bird habitat. And they've given into that, which is very helpful for other kinds of developments with bird habitat.
Thank you,
Okay,
Barry.
so the next question is, why did you have to mow the flowers after they came up?
You mow the flowers because you want to suppress the weeds that would be growing in. Flowers that we use, the tick seed and the native meadow plants, have deep roots, which can sustain all kinds of problems. Weeds generally have very shallow roots. So if you keep mowing, what you're doing is you're encouraging the flowers, the native flowers, to keep growing, and you're exhausting the root systems of the weeds. So you end up with a much finer, like grasses and things like that. You exhaust the roots, and you end up with a better product in the end.
Which park is involved near Southwest Detroit?
I don't think we have a park in Southwest Detroit with a bird meadow, although it would be really wonderful if we did. Southwest Detroit, we've been focused on a lot of another initiative called vegetative buffers, which is densely planted trees, shrubs, and tall trees, short trees, shrubs to mitigate air pollution in that part of the city. But I'm sure we could find a great candidate for a bird meadow, especially near the Detroit River.
Mm-hmm.
Wonder if that came from Castaneda Lopez's office.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
Well, the Urban Neighborhood Initiatives, who's one of our partners, has put in a bird. It wasn't a meadow, but it was several lots and a couple years ago, and that was actually the model for what we're doing in Detroit Bird City. So when you saw the kids on the bird walk pointing up in the air, that was nearby that bird habitat, and that's been successful as well. So it would be nice to expand on that concept more in Southwest, and expand. I know that there have been a lot of birding in Woodmere Cemetery, and there are other great areas down in Southwest. So it would be good to look at some parks down there as well.
Mm-hmm. Will Audubon be involved with the development of the West Riverfront?
Ooh, good question. Being the area being developed by the Riverfront Conservancy.
I think that
Not
we've
sure.
I think that's what the question is.
Yeah, we've attended some of the design sessions, but I don't think we're, to my knowledge, a formal part of that team. We try and ask the question, is habitat, on the list of things to do, to include in the designs, but we're not central to that effort, to my knowledge, unless Ava or Sarah, or Amy.
No, not that I know of.
Oh, the plan I actually saw had a ton of evergreen trees as part of that development, at least in conceptual stage, but so I question. But anyway, I'm sure it's going to turn out to be beautiful.
What was the Windsor property before it became a preserve? Do you know that, Diane?
I don't know. I do know.
I think I do know, Diane, because I'm in contact with one of the connections that I love is the fact that I'm also Canadian, is my friends in Windsor, but and that was industrial property. I don't know if it was Chrysler or GM, but it was.
We took a field trip over there when we were in the early days of formulating Detroit Bird City, we went over there and took a tour of it. And it has been, I give them a lot of credit, it has been a struggle. They've had to fight off, you know, big box stores and things like that to protect the nature preserve there. But they did make it, and it's impressive if it started out as an industrial area. That's good to know, Barry.
What is the best way to get involved and volunteer?
Bring a shovel.
Well, thank you for asking that. And this whole effort has been people coming together and making it happen. So we've had a little bit of a, you know, kind of a lean and mean crew going through, but we've done things like these cleanup days. You saw the photos of bringing out the old tires and all the garbage, because one of the things that happens in an open space that looks like it's neglected is people dump there, right? Dumping is a big problem in Detroit. And so that's step one in that. So we will typically conduct a cleanup day. So that's one way to help if you want to come in and spend a few hours one day with us. We've done things like door knocking and saying hello in neighborhoods to introduce the idea. So let's see, Ava, what are some of the other things that we've used, we've worked with volunteers on?
I can think of a few things.
mentioned.
You've already done a lot of outreach with community groups,
Yeah.
and reaching out. And that's always something I think you need volunteers for, is to kind of spread the message that areas
Yeah, it's nice during the public programs to have more people who are around to just help kind of start discussions about why this is important and the different birds and plants that are around. So having people to help out at some of those kind of public outreach events is really useful too.
Especially if you live in the community and you want to help be a champion, because we have the people like Paul and Monica Breen is another neighbor in the area who helped us. We're in the process of building a website for Detroit Bird City. So the people who are local champions who can talk to their neighbors about it when we're not there, because even though we're based in Detroit, we don't necessarily live in every neighborhood we talk to. And so we really want to try and find people who do live in the communities to champion this. So if you're one of those people, then we absolutely want to work with you as well. And if you have property that you want to be part of the 1,000 Acres program, let's talk about that too. So definitely reach out to us. We have an email address here, staff@detroitaudubon.org, and we'll be happy to follow up with you and brainstorm some things that you can do when we're ready to get back out there. Thank you.
Okay. I still have a couple more questions, so we'll see how many we can get through. If we do go until 8 o'clock, people feel free to sign off when you're done. But so the next question, I think Barry, you might have to answer this question. Where was the seed source, and were all those Michigan natives and Southeast Michigan genotypes? I'm not sure if you
have to ask that to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Okay, I looked at the list and I know a little bit about it. They are all Michigan natives. I think for possibly 2 plants might have been native to the general Midwest, maybe not specifically Michigan. I'm not sure about exact genotypes. I think that Mary might have picked and chosen some of the plants to go with the plants, like Barry mentioned, that are most showy and charismatic, just because we have to keep in mind that this has to look good to people and neighbors in order to be able to continue working on this project. And I think the source for the seeds was maybe wild type. or shooting star, feel free to email the email and I can send you the whole plant list. Next question is, and this is, I think, Barry, this will be you. Would the city of Detroit allow use of foreclosed properties for this purpose?
I'm not certain I understand the question.
I think
Closed
they're
properties.
asking if
I-
this would. Yeah, foreclosed
sorry,
properties.
you're-
Did you hear that correctly?
I heard, I don't know how to answer that question because I don't understand it. Foreclosed properties.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
We'll come back to that. Can a meadow be grown on a 40 by 115 lot? I'm not sure if that.
I can answer that. We had this problem in a neighborhood, we call the Strategic Neighborhood Fund, which is Fitzgerald neighborhood. And we did find that on the small lots that were 40 by 115, if there were buildings and or trees around the vacant lot, there wasn't enough sunlight to generate a meadow that would be conducive for bird habitat, or even butterfly, because these meadows need a great deal of sunshine, and they're not easy to develop in a small on a small lot.
Okay. Yeah. If you have more questions about doing something smaller scale, definitely still send a note to our email and we can still discuss that, even if it is very small.
Yeah, and even if it's not a meadow, I mean, there are other kinds of habitat that could help, right?
There is habitat that you would develop on a smaller lot, which wouldn't be meadow, but you could plant some trees to make it more of a forested habitat, like with hackberry, which are very helpful for several bird species and several butterfly species to lay their eggs on as host plants. Yeah, that might be a good alternative as opposed to a meadow.
Next question is, I heard Chicago had a bird park effort. Have you been in touch with that effort? Are there other urban bird parks that you are looking at for inspiration?
I actually helped develop several of those bird habitats along the lakefront back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and they have been very successful. And that would, personally for me, that's my great inspiration. But other cities are also engaging these, especially along the Chesapeake Bay area, Baltimore, and other Philadelphia, and other cities are trying to develop better bird habitats. I'm sure Diane knows of many more cities that are doing this.
Well, I visited New York when they had a grasslands exhibit at the Highline Park, which is an elevated park in New York City, and was really impressed with that. And so that was an inspiration for me. And it was a grassland. I think they called it. I forgot the name of the exhibit, but that was really nicely done with the interpretive signage all over and different kinds of grasses. And so that was an inspiration for me.
How does Audubon get the word out when volunteer events are happening? I can help answer that too. We've been a little bit focusing more on the community members around the parks to begin with. And so we haven't been putting the word out as broad, but we will be working on that, and we started sending out more regular emails. And so any public Metro Detroit wide volunteer opportunities, we can inform people about that way. And I think our last question is, are rodents a problem?
Barry, you want to take that one?
Field mice. I always get this. Field mice might, no, not really. When you start to get native plants where their root systems go down so far, you're not encouraging, but I cannot say honestly if you're discouraging rodents. It's just something that it is not good habitat for raccoons. It's not good habitat for rabbits. It's not good habitat for rats. It might possibly be better habitat for field mice, but that's even questionable on its own. Generally where these meadows are, and my friends who manage meadows, even at the Chicago Botanic Garden or in Chicago, rodents aren't their biggest concern. Yeah, that's all I can say. But it's not a issue. It's not a question I would rock solid on.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's all of our questions for this presentation. So Diane, if you want to close things up.
Okay, well, I just want to thank everyone for your time and attention tonight. We really appreciate the opportunity to talk about nature and connect with people, even though we're all stuck inside right now. So thank you very much for spending part of your evening with us, and stay safe.
Great.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
Diane, for all your work.
Thank you, Barry. Onwards and upwards.
Yeah.
Bye, guys. Oh, now I can hear.
All right.
All right. Sorry, I texted that to Amy if I should remove your mom. So she got off. That's good to
All right, good. Figured
I'm
it
glad
out.
she made it on. That was good. That was great.
It was fun. I'm really glad Barry was there. He looks like he went back to his
Yes.
cocktail, huh?
I
Okay.
think so. That's okay. That's all right. We didn't really talk about debriefing, so
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, we don't really have to, but
I thought it was awesome that the content delivery and flow of everything. I remember thinking in the beginning, gosh, how could we fit this all into such a short amount of time? And it was, I don't know how long it took you to put that together, or the thought process and how you would roll that out, but I thought it went really, really well.
thank you, Amy. That's means a lot. And this is a variation on a presentation that we've given